please welcome Will Viharo.
Hey, I kept that short and sweet because I have a 500-page memoir and I'm just sick of writing about myself. So it's called Graffiti in the Rubber Room, Writing for My Sanity. And it's epistolary in nature, meaning it's letters to people in my life, my fictional characters. The editor who asked me to write a memoir 30 years ago, Judith Regan, she gets the last letter. This is it. This is actually a duplicate of the bound manuscript, typewritten manuscript from 1994. Of course, it's updated now. So when Nick asked me to write, to read, he didn't ask me to write it, but I wrote it anyway. To read from my memoir, Noir at the Bar, my memoir, Noir, I had to think of what was appropriate, especially in terms of length. Like, there's a lot of noir stuff in my life, like probably a lot of your life. Like, life is noir, right? It's a mystery with no resolution, and there's a lot of action that happens, but you can look good doing it. And my mother is the most noir person I know. She was tragic. She was an actress, misused in 1960, but she was schizophrenic, which kicked in when I showed up. I don't know if there's a direct biological link there, but she haunts me. So, but that's a long, depressing story. So instead, I chose a letter to another relative of mine who also has problems. I've never met this person, and I hope I never do. So I'm going to, at the risk of alerting her to my whereabouts, this is Noir at the Bar, Paris, right? Is that where we are? Okay.
Yeah.
It's Beirut. It's Beirut.
That I left behind, like a very big professional.
Okay. Live from Zimbabwe, it's Will the Thrill with his memoir, Graffiti in the Rubber Room, Writing for My Sanity. And this is to my cousin, the convict. In an alternate universe, we might have been friends, not just relatives. Even lovers if we both lived in the Deep South. Probably not, since you scared me, and I'm a snowflake by your standards. Though perhaps you'd have enjoyed that perverse power. More likely, I'd have wound up just another one of your victims. In any case, that rather revealing picture you sent me from jail was hard to look at without remembering we were indeed incidentally related by blood. A substance you're no stranger to, according to the many letters detailing your exotic exploits with drug dealers and dirtbags down in Florida. This was all while I was living with my cat Puss in Berkeley circa the early 90s, lonely and horny as hell, feverishly typing away during the day while transporting frozen bags of your favorite fluid, maybe second favorite, around the Bay Area by night. Then suddenly a correspondence ensued with a hot incarcerated cousin I never knew I had, who seemed way too interested in me. You had the body of a bombshell and the charm of a sociopath, while I had the spine of a wet noodle and a dick to match. I was sucked into your seductive spell right away, but from a safe distance. I was always afraid you'd bust out of the joint and show up at my door, pistol whip and have your way with me, or worse, move in and disrupt my isolated pursuit of fame and fortune. I was already worried your half-aunt, my schizophrenic mother, likewise a virtual stranger, whom I just visited in Miami, not far from you, would one day pull a surprise permanent pop-in as well, imposing herself as an uninvited special needs roommate requiring far more care and attention than I was in a financial or emotional position to offer. So the seemingly real possibility of infected fruit from my diseased family tree dropping into my life and ruining my self-imposed solitary confinement was a source of frequent stress. I needed a release, and since I didn't have a potential girlfriend at that time, other than the blood bank babe I made the date that never was for, and even Christian Slater knows how that turned out, writing was the only therapy I had. Around that time, I was so desperate for companionship, I filled out a form for a dating service. But when I wrote down my occupation as delivery driver for a pathology lab, I realized it was futile because that wasn't the real me. At least it wasn't how I saw myself, so I didn't want to portray myself that way. I couldn't say I was a writer because I had almost nothing to show for my ambition at that point, other than a pile of unpublished manuscripts, so I tore it up. Of course, by then, my stories were flowing with bodily fluids because I felt like a plugged up fire hose about to burst. Your letters certainly greased the valves. I just wanted to keep our communications as remote as possible for the sake of my safety and sanity. I have to admit, I was equally fascinated and afraid of you. If we hadn't been related by blood, I might have just sent you a cake. If you know what I mean, and I think you do, as Joe Bob Briggs would say. Many of your letters read like detailed script synopses for 1970s women in prison movies. Guards peeking in at you while you were in the shower, with strong suggestions you took out a few favors from them in trade. Lesbian prisoner sex, a close, like very close female friend named Venus. Even when not in prison, you corresponded with inmates, sometimes getting engaged and unengaged, including a bona fide murderer you met in a holding tank up in New York. Not sure what you saw in me, a sucker, I guess. You were good at reading people, that's for sure. Other letters were straight out of Miami Vice and Scarface. You vividly described a drug deal in the Everglades that went bad. The double crosser shot at you but only hit you in the arm. Then as you went down, you fired your magnum and hit him directly in the chest. You're not sure what happened to him because your pals dragged you kicking and screaming into a van, leaving the sap there for alligator food. There are also detailed accounts of setting up mob guys for hits by luring them into seedy motel rooms for sex. It was all too good to be true, speaking strictly from a storytelling viewpoint. Around this time, I interviewed Miami's famous crime reporter, Annie Buchanan, about her most recent book and told her all about you. She said she knew the type well and strongly advised me to maintain a healthy distance. At this time, you were serving your second sentence, since after being released from the New York slammer and returning to Miami, you got pinched again almost immediately, violating your parole by pistol whipping our own grandmother, who was kind enough to take you in. That wasn't very nice. I would have never responded to your letters once they turned into criminal. I should have never even responded to your letters once they turned into criminal confessions that could be possibly used in a court of law, and that might somehow incriminate me as an after-the-fact accomplice. But that photo you sent me of you and a hot friend flanking some bozo while wearing string bikinis and high heels, looking over your shoulders with your tan asses to the camera, made me believe that you still had some good in you that was worth saving. The friends I showed it to agreed. Since I did not want this to turn into a particularly sordid episode of America's Most Wanted, I had to channel all this fear and fascination into a book, so I did. It's called Down a Dark Alley, and other than your letters, it was inspired by the best-selling crime novels of Miami journalist Carl Hiaasen, whom I met much later at a book signing. Our grandmother would send me clippings of his columns all the time. They all contained wild but true stories about the demented denizens of the Sunshine State, which I especially enjoyed as a writer Miami Vice fan. But nothing was as riveting as your first-person accounts of shootouts in the Everglades and setting up stoolies for mob hits. Even Crockett and Tubbs would blush. Your character in Down a Dark Alley, Helen Black, had many similar experiences, though greatly exaggerated for pulp purposes. The male protagonist, named Johnny Varga, Johnny Jinx in the first draft, but I decided that after revising it for publication that was too cartoonish, is a version of me, though I describe him and give him a lot of traits that are nothing like me, because unlike Vic Valentine, he isn't a true doppelganger of mine, more like a composite of me and other people I knew. This book is packed with gratuitous sex and violence. I think in a sick way, I was channeling my forbidden lust for the person in your letters, if not you, by turning her into a fictional character. If we'd ever met in the flesh, I knew I'd have none of those desires. But since I only knew you from our letters, in my imagination, to me you were Helen Black, not the real you, a virtual stranger who happened to be related to me. Down a Dark Alley was my late friend Brian's favorite novel of mine, and he was the one who encouraged me to self-publish it after the whole Judith Regan debacle. He was one of my groomsmen at my wedding, and soon after that, he tragically was diagnosed with ALS. He wrote an online chronicle of his debilitating illness under the name Brain Hell that was as brilliant as it was heartbreaking. He left behind a wife and 2 young children. This is why when I finally did self-publish it in 2011 via Lulu, I dedicated it to him. It's now part of the Thrillville Pulp Fiction Collection, Volume 2, on a double bill with Lavender Blonde, Thrillville Press, 2016. Your doppelganger has been immortalized in print. I did my bit anyway. I don't know where you are or whatever happened to you. I remember our Uncle Ronnie telling me when I visited Houston in 2017 that you were back in the slammer. I hope that's not true. But just in case, I told him never to give you my address. Cheers, your cowardly cuss. The thrill is gone.
That's Will. Will the Thrill. Zoo, 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 zoo.